Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You are welcome to another episode of Through My Eyes with Professor Bolaji Akinyemi. And as usual, it promises to be an exciting time. I'd encourage you all as we go into today's session. Please share share this feed with your friends, and let's get into this conversation with Professor Akinyemi. You're welcome again to the show this evening, sir.
Thank you very much.
Prof, let's get straight into the top issues for the week. Yet again, a police officer has shot a black man in the presence of his children. Reports say that the impact of the bullets have severed his spinal cord, shattered his vertebrae. And not many months ago, we were all talking about George Floyd. There was the outrage, the global outcry. But we are here again with James Blake. Can blacks in America ever get the justice they deserve?
Well, that's a very good question to pose. I'm just terribly distressed and depressed by what I saw in that video. There doesn't seem to have been any justification for shooting a young man or any person for that matter in the back. Even if he was resisting arrest, I understand that police training is you don't shoot a man in the back. And here was an officer firing 7 bullets at short range. And as you rightly said in your intro, cutting his spine and is paralyzed from the waist down now for life. You know, there are times I question my religion, that is turn the other eye, turn the other cheek. At times I seem to believe that maybe the Mosaic law of an eye for an eye would be better served, because I'm not sure these policemen are human beings. They are animals because they behave like animals. And what is going to be, what price will they pay? Nothing. Yes, I do understand that justice needs to be thorough, but does justice need to be that slow? All they've done to this policeman is put him on administrative duties. I ask you, if he's a man of color who has shot a policeman or a white man, where will he be now? He will be in a cell, handcuffed and waiting to be taken to court. Why do you treat policemen differently, as if they are above the law? I have felt so elated, along with the rest of the world, about the universal reaction to what happened 3, 4 months ago. But for this to now happen, you just wonder, are these policemen, are they watching? Do they live in this world? And this is where I'm starting to believe that there is systemic racism within the institutions in the United States. There has to be, for this to continue to repeat itself. I'm starting to wonder whether the right wing of the United States system is not deeply embedded in the American police force, but it is distressing, not just for the family, it is distressing for the blacks, it is distressing for the rest of the world.
Prof, in the protests that followed that brutal shooting there, we've seen the violence start to escalate in a slightly different way. We've now had the story of a 17-year-old vigilante who has killed 2 people. How do you react to that?
Well, I've had my suspicion all along, not just me, probably suspicion shared by several people, that those who demonstrate at night and loot and burn down institutions, shops, or whatever have you, do not represent. They may be agent provocateurs, people deliberately planted to do the wrong things so that they could demonize the black demonstrators, they could demonize the black cause, and that they don't share the same values with those who demonstrate during the day. And I have had this fear all along that something is bound to give. First of all, I've noticed that films of night demonstrators tend to show more white demonstrators than black demonstrators, which then leads me to doubt the purpose of these night demonstrators. Now, people have been killed. The militia, using the language of the sheriff department, have come in with guns. One has seen videos on social media of black protector groups who are also armed. Now, if they come onto the streets to protect the demonstrators, then you are going to have a total breakdown of law and order on American streets. And if the reaction of the Trump administration, rather than use this opportunity to rise above this, to actually address the nation and use the values that the United States says it is founded upon to restore sanity in the United States, but instead they emphasize law and order and send, which they're going to do, federal troops onto the streets. You're going to have total chaos and urban urban civil war on your hands. And this does not speak well of the United States. And as for us, the rest of the world, who look up to the United States as a beacon of democracy, which it claims to be, this is not encouraging at all.
Prof, what should the blacks in America do now?
I would very much suggest that the black community, through their institutions, churches, civil rights leaders, should call for a ban on night demonstrations. As I said earlier on, I have my suspicion as to the motives of night demonstrators. Yes, I accept that peaceful demonstration is embedded in the American Constitution. But nevertheless, law and order is also embedded in the American Constitution. The sanctity of life is also embedded in the American Constitution. I'm also aware, although I have I don't know the veracity of this, but I've picked up the view that most of the properties and businesses burnt down during these night demonstrations actually are businesses owned by American blacks. Whether true or not, I don't know. But whatever it is, I think that the American black community should call for a ban on night demonstrators. If you then decide to go out at night, then you're on your own. I think that demonstrations that we have during the day will be sufficient to make the point that needs to be made. We have seen even the reaction by the athletic community, the sports community, both black and white players now boycotting plays. And this hits the pocket of those who invest in American sports. Often the way to get to the heart of an American is through his pocket. And if they start to lose money through the actions of these American sportsmen and sportswomen, that even pays more to advance the cause than to go out looting and burning down things at night.
Thank you for that point of view, Prof. While we're still on the issue of the treatment of Black people, and not just in America but across the different nations, because we see issues in China, we see issues in Germany, and other parts of Europe as well. But there's an area that, Prof, we want to hear your views on, and that is how mainstream media portray Black people in the context of the work they do, in the context of the results that they achieve in some of the endeavors that they get involved in. What are your views on this, Prof?
Well, they said there are several ways to skin a cat. I have noticed that one of the consequences of the Black Lives Matter movement has been the way the treatment of Blacks in America and in Europe have undergone positive change in the media. They will now no longer get away with reporting or casting events that will reflect negatively on Black societies in the United States or in Europe. However, I want the Blacks in the diaspora to realize that an indirect way of diminishing them is to suppress positive news about Africa. Let me give you a few examples. On the COVID-19, why is there the emphasis on South African failure to cope with the COVID-19? And there is total silence on the success of, say, a country like Nigeria in coping with the COVID-19. The statistics, the data is there. If you look at the figure of people who are positive and in hospital, and the figure of those who died of the infection of COVID-19, you will see that the Nigerians have done admirably well. We are not talking now about whether they are doing enough testing. The point I'm making is the data given out of those tested, found positive, hospitalized, and then treated positively and who recovered. Nigeria is a success story. You don't hear this. Instead, what you hear is the South African failure to achieve success of treatment. That's number one. Number two, now the official government institution that monitors treatment came out within the last 24 hours that chloroquine has been a successful treatment, at least in Nigeria, if it is used in the early cases of the infection. Now, I'm waiting to see whether one will catch this on the important international media. I would doubt it. Now, you could say, why did it take the Nigerian medical institution 6 months to come out with this statement? After all, they've been treating people every day, every week. Why couldn't they have said this 3 weeks ago? That's a totally different question. But having now said this, that chloroquine, if used early, as we have done in Nigeria, it has been a successful treatment. Let me see whether this is going to get into CNN or BBC or Al Jazeera. Let us see.
Prof, given Prof, before that third point.
Wait. Thirdly, the success that ECOWAS has had with moderating the Mali strategic security crisis following the coup there. Only Al Jazeera has carried that story, has been monitoring it every day. I haven't seen it on BBC, I haven't seen it on CNN. And yet if shooting starts on the streets of Bamako, the capital of Mali, today, and people start getting killed, that will immediately, within the next few hours, get onto the BBC and the CNN. These are the points that we need to pay attention to.
Prof, the question I was going to ask was this, going back to the issue of chloroquine. Do you think that the pushback in, say, the United States on chloroquine by some of the medical experts there could be a contributing factor to why Nigeria is not saying anything in the mainstream media about chloroquine?
But is that enough justification not to report a success story in Africa on treatment on COVID-19? Ebola, they will yell to the top of their voices to heavens about Ebola. But success story, they will not talk about it. Now, I think that the reason we in Nigeria have recorded success in handling COVID-19 is because we have been using chloroquine as malaria treatment for probably 70 years. And so we probably have it in our DNA, and that has helped us to cope. Well, let them say this. Let them interview African scientists, African medical scientists. Let us hear their views and not just depend upon whether chloroquine worked in the United States or in Great Britain or in France. That's not the whole world. Africa is still part of the world. And I believe that the only way to handle this situation is not to continue this preaching. I'm appealing to American black billionaires to try to help to set up an African Al Jazeera or an African CNN that will concentrate on showing you the image of Africa, whether successful or not. Let them show us the total picture. but not just be a reflection of areas where Africa has failed. There are success stories. There are success stories in Africa for the rest of the world to know about.
Prof, do you think, in light of what you are talking about there, I think there is fresh news coming out that the president of the Africa Development Bank has just been re-elected. That hasn't hit mainstream media. Do you think that's going to be a slap uh, in the face for the Americans, showing them, there you go?
Well, let me talk about the positive aspect. It is a success story for Africa. Incidentally, he won by 100% of the votes. This is a success story for Africa. And the votes are not just based on emotionalism or sentimentalism. His record spoke for itself. And when you look at the various investigative panels that were set up involving credible figures on the international plane from the international community who vetted him and found him innocent of the charges leveled against him in an attempt to derail him. If he had lost that election, it would have been breaking news by now, because the media knew that they were having that annual general meeting, which started yesterday. So I'm sure hotlines would have been installed. If he had lost, it would have been breaking news. He won, and that news up till now is being ignored. That's not right journalism. It isn't.
Well, there's a comment here on Facebook addressing the point about this point about blacks in media, and one of the points here, and I think we dealt with this a couple of sessions back, and this is about the fact that are blacks really black, and is that the way we have labeled ourselves? So this person says, are we really black? Or some people call us black. What actually is black? What makes us black and what makes others white?
Uh, as we said, you are right, we dealt with this issue probably about a month ago. I invited our viewers to make their contribution, because I have no answer to this. What do we call ourselves? And what do others call us? Has there been a convergence? Is that why we are using the term black? Asians don't call themselves yellow. White Americans just call themselves Americans. Are we Africans? What did we call ourselves before colonialists and Arabs came into Africa? So let us have a debate. Let's have a conversation about this. Mr. Moderator, if you could get experts in language to join us, maybe one day, on this issue of what should we call ourselves, because frankly, it is a decision that needs to be made. Are we going to just call ourselves people of color? Because look at the way they've had difficulties dealing with Kamala Harris. You've had a woman of color, you've had a Southeast Asian woman, you've had a black woman. The media itself is confused. And in this particular case, they are not to blame. All of us are confused about what we really should call ourselves in Africa and call our Africans in the diaspora. We must resolve this issue.
There's a question here that says COVID fear works to some people's advantage. A simple solution would dissipate the tension some need to operate. Do you also think that the rise of Black success means that we threaten white people?
I think it is more than that. I think all right. I think there is systemic racism in the media. I don't think it has to do with the amount of profit that people are going to make from vaccine. I think there is endemic racism in the media. Look, let me remind us that for almost 30 years after African independence, the international media was sending white correspondents to Africa to report. And the first thing the man does when the correspondent does when he gets to Africa is to look for where there are open drains, where there are slums. So whenever he wanted to file his report, his camera will be focused with his back towards the slums. And this for almost 30, 40 years was what they were transmitting abroad, forgetting that there are slums in Europe, there are slums in the United States, which they will not use as a background. When we complained, they then moved to the second stage, where they have now sent out African correspondents. But I'm sure the template they have given them is if you want your transmissions to be reflected, we don't want to see all this progress that is being made in Africa. No, our viewers want to see the Africa that has been drummed into them. It's just that now, instead of using white correspondents, we will use Black correspondents, but the message still has to be the same. I must again give credit to Al Jazeera. In fact, if you look at the news readers, the commentators, those who run special programs on Al Jazeera, it's like walking into a United Nations building. Various colors, various civilizations are represented. I'm afraid I cannot say the same thing for the BBC. In fact, with the BBC World Service, I don't see a presence of Black news readers as being representative of their own main news readers during the day. I think they also all have to keep at the back of their mind that they can try the one-third formula. One-third European readers, one-third Asian readers, and one-third African readers. That way, at least, we may see a balancing in the news that is reflected.
Well, thank you, Prof. Let's move on to the United States. We've now had the Republican National Convention that has taken place. We've had all the speakers from there, and we now have an opportunity to compare the messages that came out of that with the Democratic National Convention. What were the highlights for you from the Republican National Convention?
The highlight for me, in the sense that I didn't expect such a positive tone, was the speech, the presentation by Mrs. Trump, the First Lady of the United States. She spoke from the heart. She expressed empathy. She seems to understand the United States more than her husband and more than Pence, the vice president, in identifying the problems of the United States and where she thinks the United States should be going. That surprised me. And that, in fact, I think that 10 years from now, 20 years from now, when we start to write, when scholars start to come out with thesis about this 2020 National Convention of both parties, her speech will stand out as the acceptable face of the United States. Maybe we shouldn't be surprised. I mean, after all, she is an immigrant, and so maybe to that extent, she doesn't reflect the short-sightedness and the prejudices bred into right-wing Americans. So that is one thing that struck me positively. The second thing, and this is negative, is the way American institutions were used for the benefit of a political party. The White House is supposed to be the embodiment of the United States, the peak of the American pyramid. And yet we saw it being used as props for the Republican convention. There are certain things that's just not done. And yet that's one of the things that was done. And Pence yesterday went to this house where the American national anthem was constructed. And he used it as a prop for his own speech. It's, there are certain things that are above politics and that have been, accepted and regarded as such for 200 years. But the only saving grace in all of this, probably all my listeners are probably too young to remember the time of McCarthy in the United States politics. McCarthy he destroyed lives, he destroyed institutions. There was nothing that was beyond him in the destruction that he embarked upon. And yet who remembers him today? Apart from footnotes in American history, who remembers those who assisted him in his destructive escapades? Who does? So, 20 years from now, no matter how painful are the victims right now, 20 years, 30 years from now, all these, Republicans who are destroying American institutions will probably just be footnotes in American history. The United States will survive this. It will. And the United States will go back to the United States that I studied in. The United States, that's the acceptable face, not the ugly American, but the acceptable face, the Kennedy American, the Lincoln American, the Clinton American, the American of the young Bush, the American of what's the name of I don't remember his name now. Oh well. I think
John
you
F.
have an
Kennedy?
idea. Yes, Robert F. Kennedy, but no, quite recently he became chairman, Joint Chiefs of Staff in the United States, and he was National Security Advisor.
Colin Powell.
Thank you, Colin Powell. The United States of Colin Powell. He's a Republican, but that's the acceptable face. Yes, it's all right to be a Republican, but not to be a tractor, just demolishing everything that is in your presence.
Well, Prof, you had earlier expressed your support for the Biden-Harris team. Did you hear anything that has changed your mind?
No, no. In fact, the way the Republicans have conducted themselves have done nothing but strengthen my prayer and my hope that Biden-Harris ticket will win, not just for the sake of the United States, but for the sake of the world, because the destructive escapades of Trump has been extended to the international community. And I'm not really the only one. Do you know there are so many Republican groups that have been formed now who have said they will campaign and they will vote for the Biden-Harris ticket. Some call themselves the Lincoln Republicans for Biden. Some call themselves Republican Renaissance. So I just pray, and I will still put my money. I'm not sure. I'm voting with my heart now rather than my brains. It's an expression of hope over experience.
Wow. All right. Before we move on to the issue of Israel and the United Arab Emirates, there is a question here on YouTube, which I believe you answered last week, but someone is asking for some form of clarification on that point. And this one relates specifically to foreign policy. Uh, where has it derailed? Is it under military regime? Only, let's see. Is it under military regime only that Nigeria is seen as a force to be reckoned with as regards foreign policy? I believe we answered that, but if you could clarify that point for our viewers again, that would be much helpful, please.
Well, no. It depends on the dispensation, the ideological dispensation of who the head of state is, whether that head of state is a military man or a civilian head of state. It is true that in our experience, we can point to periods that seem to coincide with the military being in power and radicalism in foreign policy. As I said, it may have to do with the fact that there are so many distractions under civilians. You've got to deal with your political party. You've got to deal with the National Assembly. So many distractions. Whereas with the military, a military establishment deals is priority. Actually, it's its constituency, and that is the military establishment itself. So to that extent, it may have more room to focus on foreign policy. Number two, the military tends to look for the brightest and the best within their society to help them run government, whereas the civilians look for their party supporters, even if these party supporters are crooks, and people who have very little idea about focusing on where they have been put, in what ministries they have been put. So there is some element of truth in what the questionnaire has in mind. I don't like to focus on Nigeria alone. NASA ran a radical foreign policy in Egypt. Gaddafi did in Libya, and of course, definitely we did in Nigeria. Rawlings did in Ghana. But the present Ghanaian government under civil rule has been running what I will call a national interest activist foreign and Pan-Africanist foreign policy, which all put together you may like to call a radical foreign policy.
All right, thank you for that, Prof. The United Arab Emirates has become the first Gulf state to normalize diplomatic ties with Israel by signing the historic peace deal. What are your views on this, and what is the implication of this deal for that region?
Well, I've been following developments in the UAE, United Arab Emirates, for the past 10 years. And I kept telling my friends that I am not going to be surprised if the UAE carves out an activist role for itself that is a departure from the Arab consensus because of its emphasis on development rather than emphasis on Arab nationalism. They don't claim that they are not Arabs. No, they are Arabs. So you could say, tell from their name. However, the focus has been on a modernizing ideology. And to that extent, I could see that they think there is more for them to gain from an alliance with Israel, which also in that region is a modernizing state. And to that extent, I wasn't surprised that it even took so long for it to become evident is the surprise. Behind the scenes, cooperation has been going on between these two nations for quite a while. Their diplomats have been meeting, they've been exchanging scientific information, they've been exchanging medical information, they've been exchanging technological information. And I think the UAE has just come to the conclusion that this is the right time for them to come out openly in this relationship and get on with the development of the UAE. The emphasis is on the development of the UAE. And the hope will then be that while developing themselves and achieving greater heights than they have achieved so far, they will use that as a leverage to try and get Israel to moderate its own policies towards the Palestinians. The UAE obviously had come to the conclusion that all this confrontation between the Palestinians and the Israelis have not done the Palestinian cause much good. And this analysis is buttressed by the fact that it's small masses, no doubt, but that they got Israel, they got Netanyahu to agree to suspend his policies to annex more Palestinian land in exchange for this recognition and putting their relationship on a firmer footing. It's possible that if another Arab country should step up to bat along the same parameters, they may succeed in getting Israel to change from suspension to giving up. Finally, it's going to be a lot because Netanyahu is a very stubborn man. But Netanyahu himself is having domestic problems in Israel. So he himself may be willing now to make concessions, not to the Palestinians directly, but to Arab countries that will favor the Palestinians.
Do you see any Arab countries following in the same path as UAE?
Yes, names have been whispered on top of the trees. If you will pardon what seems like an oxymoronic expression, since normally you shout at the top of the trees. But in diplomacy, funny things do happen. I've heard of Oman, I've heard of Sudan, so I will not be surprised. I will not be surprised at all.
Iran has openly condemned this, and there's a question here on YouTube that says, "What is the implication of this UAE-Israeli accord for the Gulf states vis-a-vis Iranian policy?"
Well, one of the I think one of the things that we should not ignore that spurred the UAE onto reinforcing its relationship with Israel actually has been the activities of Iran in the Middle East. There is a competition going on, and it has not been peaceful between Iran, Syria on one hand, and, if you like, the Sunni Arabs on the other hand. And I think when it now things are starting to get to the stage of survival, especially with Turkey throwing its hat into the ring. Although Turkey, which also has been critical of the agreement, has had a long-standing relationship with Israel. So that, to some extent, will moderate how far Turkey will go in its opposition to this agreement. But with Iran, Syria, battle lines are being drawn. With Iran on one hand, Iran, Syria on one hand, and then of course the South and the Gulf countries on the other hand. So the national interest of the different countries will be dictated by influences from these factors that you've drawn attention to through the questions. The Iranian factor, the Syrian factor, the Turkish factor, and of course the Israeli factor itself. I think the number of Arab countries who are going to establish openly relationship with Israel, I think the number will go up.
All right. We have a question here, which has to do with two NATO allies are embroiled in a face-off in the Eastern Mediterranean. How do you react to this? And the second question says, if this were to escalate to a war, what options exist for mediation?
Relationship between Turkey and Greece have been a sore point in NATO activities, NATO strategy, NATO relation, NATO activities for a very long time, since the end of the Second World War. And the more assertive Turkey had become in the past, say, 5 to 10 years, the more problematic that relationship with Greece had become. Let me identify, for the purpose of our viewers, some of these explosive points. One is in Cyprus itself, because Cyprus is made up of Turkish Cypriots and Greek Cypriots. So the island is divided into two, and both Turkey and Greece watch each other like hawks, their activities on that island. Number two, and this is a problem that is not unique to that area of the Mediterranean, which is, how do you define the exclusive economic zone of a series of islands that are overlapping? Now, most of those islands are Greek. Turkey does not deny this. But what Greece has argued is that the 300 or so economic exclusive zone should be the totality of the islands then thrown abroad to calculate the exclusive economic zone. Whereas Turkey has maintained that for each of the islands, it should just be either the 3 miles or the 12 miles maximum, that you cannot go for that 300 exclusive economic zone. And this is where the problem has come in. It's going to be easy to solve in the sense that there are other areas of the world where you have similar problems. And if you do have the will to resolve it, if you don't allow that matter to be buffeted by other issues from elsewhere, then it should be possible for NATO to deal with the matter. However, this is where American role in NATO becomes crucial and becomes critical. NATO will need the United States gravitas to intervene and tell Turkey and Greece how far they can go. But if the United States is still in this mood of being anti-NATO itself, then it weakens NATO's ability to mediate between Turkey and Greece. I know the German foreign minister has already embarked on some shuttle diplomacy, but it's not the same thing as having the American Secretary of State stepping in and telling them how far they can go.
All right, Prof, thank you for that tonight. We're just about on time, but there is one question I'm going to put to you because we may not be able to come back to this next week. And it is this: is the normalization of relationship of UAE with Israel a survivalist strategy in the light of Iranian aggression in the Gulf region?
It's a survival strategy for both countries, for both the UAE and for Israel, most certainly. Keep this in mind. The problem between Iran and the Arab countries is not, it's cultural, it's religious, it goes all the way back to the very the post-Muhammad period of the Islamic Caliphate. That's where the division between the Shiites and the Sunnis came in. Now, I'm not an Islamic scholar. These are things which any scholar of international relations should be familiar with. So it makes it very difficult that the competition for influence in the Mediterranean between the Shiite group, the Shiite nations, and the Sunni nations, it makes it difficult because you are dealing, to moderate, because you are dealing with a competition and issue. That's why I won't call it aggression. To call it aggression is to adopt an American view of the matter. Nations fight for their national interests, and whatever can expand that national interest, they will pursue. And this is what Iran has been doing in the Mediterranean. Of course, it's going to get a pushback from the Saudi-led Sunni coalition. It will get a pushback. I think that the allies of both sides should simply try to make sure that that competition, while you cannot stop it, you can try to moderate it, that it just continues to bubble under the surface, but doesn't blow up into a situation where the United States, the Russians, then get dragged into, again, open confrontation while their supporters try to drag them in open competition.
Fantastic. I want to thank you again, Prof, for this evening. And we want to thank you, our viewers, for joining us this evening. Thank you for being there. Thank you for all the questions that you have put on here. And we'll see you again, same time next week, 7 p.m. And as we go into September, we're going to be getting some guests that will be joining the Prof here. So please don't miss next week. Don't miss the coming weeks. We will give you some more information about these programs as we progress in the month of September. Thank you for watching.